Hey guys! Tonight we dive into one of those myths that manages to be both spectacular and kind of ridiculous. The saga of Perseus and Medusa. You're going to slip into the role of a dreamtime wanderer, carried along on the waves of an ancient story where fate is unshakable. Gods meddle like nosy neighbors, and even your crib might double as a coffin. You probably won't survive this if you take it literally, but that's fine, because this is all about drifting off, not dodging sea monsters. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, drop your location and the local time in the comments so we can all see where in the world everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture yourself in Argos, an old Greek city glowing under the sun, where King Perseus hears a prophecy that one day his daughter's child will kill him. Ancient kings had a tendency to overreact to prophecies rather than just practice better parenting. Perseus locks his daughter Dana in a bronze chamber. You stand beside her as light trickles through, and despite her imprisonment, she glows with quiet resilience. The twist! Zeus, in one of his more creative disguises, visits her as a shower of golden rain. Historians still argue whether this image was meant to be taken as divine fertility symbolism or just poetic flair. But either way, the result is a baby, Perseus. You can almost hear his infant cries echo against the bronze walls, bouncing like a warning bell. Perseus, predictably horrified, refuses to kill his grandson directly, bad press, even for a king. Instead, he stuffs Dana and Perseus into a wooden chest and tosses them into the sea. Imagine being rocked back and forth on an endless watery cradle, the smell of salt sharp in your nose, waves lapping like lullabies, and nothing but the stars to keep watch. It's one of those moments where you realize ancient myths were surprisingly good at capturing both terror and serenity. Here's a historical fact to ground you. Greeks often used the sea as a stage for both punishment and divine deliverance. Castaways weren't just unlucky, they were players in a cosmic lottery. Dana and Perseus float for days, their chest creaking with each swell, until they wash ashore on the island of Serene. Fisherman Dictys, gentle and kind, opens the chest and finds them. He raises Perseus as his own, teaching him the rhythms of the island, mending nets, gutting fish, feeling the cool spray on your cheeks every dawn. One quirky tidbit: some storytellers claim that the chest was guided by dolphins, as though the gods themselves had summoned an aquatic Uber. That detail may or may not be literal, but it shows how even side characters in Greek mythology, yes, even dolphins could have divine job descriptions. As Perseus grows, you trail behind him along the rocky Serene shore, hearing gulls cry and sandals crunch over shells. He becomes strong, quick and bold, shaped not by royal tutors, but by the simplicity of island life. He learns humility from Dictys, loyalty from his mother, and without realizing it yet a stubbornness that will one day make him bold enough to stare down a monster whose very glance could turn him to stone. Already, the prophecy's shadow lingers. Perseus still rules far away, perhaps nervously glancing over his shoulder, though he doesn't know where Dana and her son have drifted. But you know. You've seen the chest slam against the shore, heard the fisherman's gasp, and smelled the brine in the air. You're standing right at the beginning of Perseus' journey, lulled by waves and the soft creak of wooden boats. The sea that almost swallowed him has now delivered him to safety. It's a reminder prophecies in Greek myths weren't avoided, only delayed. The chest, the waves, the rescue, all are just opening chords in a melody destined to crescendo. You feel the air of inevitability, like a bedtime story where you already know the ending. But the telling is what makes the journey comforting. On Serene, life moves with a slower pulse. You can feel it when you walk the narrow dirt paths winding between olive groves and sun-baked cottages. The air smells of salt, figs and fish drying on racks. And Perseus grows into this rhythm as naturally as the tides. Dictys, the fisherman who pulled him from the chest, becomes his mentor, teaching him how to tie knots so strong they'd hold a ball, how to cast nets wide into the sparkling shallows, and how to read the stars for direction when clouds smother the horizon. You watch him stand barefoot on the wet rocks, letting the sea spray sting his face, while Dana, his mother, hums lullabies she remembers from ARGOS. The boy isn't treated like royalty here. There are no golden cradles or parades. He hauls nets, cuts reeds, and carries baskets of mussels up the beach. Oddly enough, this makes him more prepared for the trials to come, and like princes cushioned by court life. Perseus learns grit, and in Greek mythology, grit counts more than gilded sandals. Historians still argue whether Seriphos was ever truly prosperous, or just a rocky speck in the Aegean. But the legend insists it was here that Perseus built his strength. Meanwhile, you sense trouble brewing. Dictys may be kind, but his brother Polydectes, king of Seriphos, is cut from a different cloth. Imagine a man who struts through dusty streets pretending he's in a fashion runway. Except the tunic is outdated and the power trips are constant. He notices Dana's beauty because, in these myths, apparently every woman of royal blood was the most beautiful anyone had ever seen. Polydectes wants her, but Dana refuses, holding on to her dignity like a shield. Perseus, now a teenager, shadows her like a hawk. Here's a curious fringe tidbit. Some late versions of the myth suggest Perseus was unusually tall, almost giant-like, towering over islanders even before he was grown. Was that mythic exaggeration or just a way of signaling heroic stature? Hard to say. Either way, the young man makes an intimidating protector and Polydectes cedes. You trail behind Perseus one evening as he carries baskets back to Dictys' hut. The sun melts over the horizon and a cool wind brushes your skin. It's peaceful until Polydectes starts scheming. Unable to woo Dana directly, he hatches a plan to get rid of her son. You can practically hear the king muttering, "If only someone would go fetch me the head of Medusa." That would be **, romantic. But for now, Perseus doesn't know any of this. He sits by the fire with Dana, listening to her stories of Argos, of a grandfather who feared him before he was even born. He feels both sorrow and pride: sorrow for the life they lost, pride for surviving. The warmth of the fire flickers over his face, highlighting that stubborn jaw you'll later see squared against monsters. The island winds whisper fate, though you barely notice at first. The chest that brought him here may as well still creak in the background, a reminder that destiny travels quietly until it knocks on your door again. And for Perseus, destiny isn't far. The first hint of Polydectes' scheme comes during a feast, the kind where the king tries to look generous, but mostly just wants everyone to admire him. Picture low wooden tables loaded with fish, figs, honey cakes, and the sharp scent of wine that makes the room hum with conversation. Oil lamps flicker on the walls, shadows dancing like restless spirits. You sit among the islanders, watching Polydectes pretend to be magnanimous. He smiles to wide, claps to loudly, and his eyes keep drifting to Dana, who deliberately avoids his gaze. Perseus notices. You notice? Everyone notices. Polydectes finally speaks, his voice carrying the oily smoothness of someone who thinks they're clever. He claims he plans to marry another woman, not Dana. This, of course, is a lie. To celebrate, he asks each man at the feast to bring him a wedding gift. Horses, mostly. Because what better way to impress a bride than by amassing a stable like a mythic car collection? The hall murmurs with agreement, but Perseus, young, proud, and lacking horses, blurts out that he could bring anything, even the head of Medusa. The words slip like a stone tossed too far into the sea, and you immediately feel the hush descend. Historians still argue whether Perseus actually volunteered, or if Polydectes cornered him into saying it. Either way, the king seizes the chance. He leans forward, his smile suddenly sharp as a spear. "Then bring me her head," he says, as though casually ordering dessert. Around the room, jaws drop. Medusa isn't just a monster, she's a death sentence. Here's your mainstream fact. Medusa was one of 3 Gorgon sisters in Greek mythology, the only mortal one, which made her both terrifying and vulnerable. Her gaze could turn any living creature into stone soldiers, kings, heroes, you name it. Facing her wasn't bravery, it was suicide. And now, Perseus has essentially signed up for this suicide mission. Dana's face pales at the news. Dictys squeezes his shoulder, but words fail him. You sense the heavy silence in the room, broken only by the crackle of oil lamps. Perseus tries to keep his pride intact because how else do you respond when everyone just heard you boast yourself into certain doom? A quirky tidbit, some ancient commentators joked that Perseus' offer was like promising to bring back the moon itself. That exaggeration gives you a sense of how impossible the task sounded to people of the time. It wasn't a quest, it was a setup, later, walking the moonlit beach. Perseus feels the weight of it all. You walk beside him, hearing the surf crash, his sandals dragging through the sand. He wonders if this is how heroes are made, not through triumph, but through being forced into impossible corners. The stars glitter above like cold spectators. He doesn't know yet that the gods themselves are watching, waiting to hand him tools no fisherman could provide. But for tonight, he feels only dread, his mother's quiet sobs echoing behind him, and a cruel grin of Polydectes burned into his memory. The gods rarely miss a chance to meddle when human drama is at stake, and Perseus' boast about slaying Medusa practically sends a notification straight to Olympus. You can imagine Hermes leaning over to Athena at some divine banquet, smirking and saying, "Did you hear about this kid on Seriphos? He actually promised to bag Medusa's head." Athena, goddess of strategy and wisdom, probably sets down her wine cup with a sigh. You feel their presence like a sudden breeze on the island, an invisible shift. That tells you Perseus isn't alone anymore. One morning, as Perseus broods on a rocky cliff overlooking the sea, the air ripples, the light bends. You blink, and suddenly two figures stand before him. Athena's eyes are sharp as polished bronze, and her armor gleams in the sun. Hermes looks casual by comparison, winged sandals twitching like restless pigeons. Caduceus' staff tapping against the stone. Their rival feels like a divine fashion show, complete with magical accessories. Athena offers Perseus a polished bronze shield, so bright it reflects the sea like a mirror. It's no ordinary shield, it's the ultimate life hack. Since looking directly at Medusa means instant petrification, Perseus will be able to sneak up on her by using the reflection instead of her deadly eyes. Hermes, not to be outdone, hands over a curved sword, a harp blade sharp enough to cut through scales and sinew. He also promises to guide Perseus, acting as GPS with winged sandals included later. Here's your historical anchor. Greek warriors often polished bronze shields, until they reflected like mirrors. In fact, some hoplites carried them not just for defense, but to catch sunlight and blind their enemies. So the myth doesn't come out of nowhere, it's just, scaled up to monster-fighting proportions. Perseus, still reeling, runs his fingers over the shield's smooth surface. He can see his own reflection, eyes wide, hair tousled from sea winds. Hermes grins, tossing the sword lightly, then catching it with the ease of someone who's been casually fighting monsters since breakfast. A quirky tidbit? In some vase paintings, Hermes is shown standing just behind Perseus at every major moment, almost like a mythological hype man. It's as if the artists couldn't resist drawing him photobombing the action. Athena explains the next step. Perseus needs more than weapons. He must find the Graeae, three ancient sisters who share a single eye and a single tooth. They alone know the location of the nymphs who guard further magical tools, the cap of invisibility, winged sandals, and a special bag for carrying Medusa's head. Historians still argue whether this detail about the Graeae was grafted onto the myth later, perhaps to add a spooky detour, or whether it reflects an older folk tale about witches sharing body parts. Either way, it makes for great nightmare fuel. Standing there, Perseus feels the weight of destiny pressing harder. You stand with him, the salt air cool against your cheeks, listening to Athena's calm instructions and Hermes' playful encouragement. For the first time, the impossible task seems, still insane, but slightly less suicidal. And in Greek myth, slightly less suicidal is already a big win. The hunt for the Graeae begins under a sky thick with stars, the kind that makes you feel both small and strangely significant. Perseus, shield strapped to his back, sword at his side, trudges along rocky paths with Hermes hovering beside him, winged sandals barely whispering against the air. Athena's guidance is more subtle. You sense her as a steady voice in his head, a cool clarity that pushes back panic whenever doubt creeps in. the Graeae are no ordinary witches. Imagine 3 ancient crones, so old their skin seems like parchment stretched thin, their hair weary as seaweed, their backs bent like weathered olive trees. And here's the kicker, they share a single eye and a single tooth. One sister pops the eye in to scan the horizon, then passes it to the next like a contact lens at a sleepover gone terribly wrong. You almost shiver at the absurdity, yet there's something eerie about it to reach them. Perseus crosses landscapes that seem stitched together from fragments of nightmares. You walk beside him through marshes buzzing with insects, over jagged hills that scrape at the sky, and across rivers glinting like molten bronze in the moonlight. Some versions of the story place the Graeae near the edge of Oceanus, the mythical river encircling the world. Historians still argue whether this location was symbolic of the edge of knowledge, or simply another way to make Perseus' road trip sound extra dramatic. Here's a historical fact to ground you. Many Greek myths included threshold guardians, figures who controlled access to hidden wisdom or resources. The Graeae fit neatly into that archetype, liminal beings, who aren't quite alive in the ordinary sense, but not yet dead either. They linger in twilight, clutching their single eye like a password to forbidden knowledge. Perseus finally stumbles upon their lair, a cave smelling of damp moss and age where the sisters huddle around a small fire. You watch as one sister gnaws with the shared tooth while another rolls the eyeball in her palm, like a marble, ready to slot it into her socket. The third snickers, blind for the moment, reaching for a stick to prod the fire. The scene is both grotesque and, oddly enough, a little funny. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some storytellers claimed the Graeae were actually related to the Gorgons, making them Perseus' monster-in-laws in a roundabout way. Imagine Thanksgiving dinner with that extended family, definitely one you'd want to RSVP no to. Perseus crouches in the shadows, his breath slow, heart thumping in your ears. Hermes whispers encouragement, though you suspect he's enjoying the spectacle. With a burst of speed, Perseus darts forward, snatches the eyeball mid-pass, and steps back into the darkness. The sisters shriek, flailing blindly, their bony hands clawing the air. Their voices rasp like wind scraping across rocks, demanding their eye back. Perseus holds it just out of reach, his tone calm but firm. Tell me where to find the nymphs. The bargain is struck. For once, the young man isn't boasting, he's bargaining, controlling the conversation with the upper hand or, technically, the upper eye. The Graeae, defeated by necessity, hiss up directions, spitting curses between words. You feel the air grow colder, as though the very mention of the nymphs stirs something ancient and powerful. Perseus pockets the knowledge and, with a flick of his wrist, tosses the eye back. The sisters scramble like gulls fighting over scraps, and you can't help but smile at the absurd picture. Even in the darkest myths, there's room for slapstick. With the Graeae's directions fresh in his mind, Perseus sets off again, leaving behind the cackling chaos of 3 toothless witches fumbling in the dark. You walk beside him, the air cooler now, the stars shifting overhead as if they too are pointing the way. His stride has changed. He's still young, still carrying the bravado of that boast at Polydectes' feast. But something steadier settles in. He knows information is power, and tonight he stole it right out of an old woman's palm. The Graeae had hissed their directions with venom, spitting every word as though it burned. Seek the nymphs. Seek the ones who guard the gifts. Perseus had listened carefully, eye clenched tight in his fist like a bargaining chip, refusing to flinch even when their bony hands raked across the air. He'd only returned it once the sisters croaked out the exact path. That trade, cruel but clever, gives him what he needs, the way to find the hidden guardians of divine tools. This little standoff echoes a common theme in Greek stories, mortals outsmarting beings older, and supposedly wiser than themselves. Historians still argue whether Perseus' theft of the Graeae's eye was meant to highlight Greek admiration for cleverness or to serve as a cautionary tale about disrespecting the elderly. Either way, you can almost hear the sisters muttering curses long after he's gone. Here's your historical grounding fact. In many Greek mystery cults, initiation often involved confronting grotesque or unsettling figures, part of a ritual, to strip away fear and prepare the initiate for hidden truths. Perseus' encounter with the Graeae mirrors that initiation, as if he has passed a test of nerve before he can step into the deeper, stranger parts of his quest. The path to the nymphs takes him across landscapes both barren and lush, a contradiction only myths could manage. One moment you're trudging through dry valleys where rocks crunch underfoot like shattered pottery. The next, you're winding through groves so green they almost hum with life. At last, you reach a glade hidden from ordinary eyes. The air here feels different, thicker, golden alive. The nymphs emerge from the shadows, figures of haunting beauty. Their movements like water bending in sunlight. Perseus speaks carefully, remembering Athena's warning to show respect. These nymphs don't need his swagger, they already know who he is and why he has come. With solemn grace, they present him with the gifts, a pouch, the kibises, woven to hold Medusa's head without spilling its deadly magic. The cap of Hades, a helmet of invisibility to slip unseen through danger. And winged sandals, glinting as though stitched with strands of dawn. A quirky tidbit for you, some ancient storytellers said the helmet of Hades was so effective that even the gods sometimes lost track of Perseus while he wore it, making him the original master of the ghosted text message. As Perseus fastens the sandals and feels the pouch at his side, he senses the tide turning. The quest is still impossible, but now impossibility comes with accessories. You sense Athena's approval like a nod in the wind, and Hermes chuckles as if to say, "Now we're finally getting somewhere." With the grey behind him and the nymph's treasures secured, Perseus steps forward lighter, faster, and far more dangerous. And you, trailing just behind, can't shake the thought that all of this began with one boast at a feast. One slip of pride turned into destiny. The sandals feel strange at first. You trail alongside Perseus as he laces them up, leather straps glowing faintly in the half-light. Then, with a cautious step, he rises a few inches above the ground. Another step, and he's floating, the air rushing beneath his heels like an invisible current. Hermes claps his hands in delight, laughing at how awkward the young hero looks wobbling mid-air. Perseus steadies himself, then soars higher, the island shrinking below him into a patchwork of cliffs and surf. You're carried with him, the wind cool against your skin, salt tang brushing your lips. The pouch, the kibises, hangs at his side, woven tighter than any fisherman's net, designed to contain the uncontainable. And resting atop his head, the cap of Hades hums with subtle power, a veil of concealment that seems to bend the world around him. These aren't trinkets, they're tools from the dawn of myth itself. Historians still argue whether such items symbolized real objects from ancient cult rituals, or were purely narrative inventions. But either way, they give Perseus the ultimate starter pack for monster hunting. Here's your mainstream fact: winged sandals, or ****, became such a recognizable Greek motif that even Roman poets used them as shorthand for swiftness. Mercury, the Roman version of Hermes, never appears in art without them. In fact, the symbol still lingers today. You've probably seen them in logos for medical organizations or even comic book heroes. Perseus swoops low over valleys and rivers, his shadow flickering across grazing goats who bleat in confusion. Villagers look up, squinting at the mysterious figure in the sky, wondering if they've glimpsed a god. You feel the thrill of flight, the stomach drop swoop of sudden dives, and the dizzying quiet when he hovers high above the earth. It's intoxicating. Even a little comic. Imagine learning to fly with no training wheels. One quirky tidbit: some medieval retellings insisted that Perseus tied little bells to his sandals, so mortals could hear him coming. Otherwise, he'd be mistaken for a ghost. No ancient vase ever shows this, but you can picture it: a hero jingling like a festive goat while on his way to behead a monster. Athena's shield glimmers at his back, catching moonlight as though guiding him. Hermes flies beside him with practiced ease, tilting and weaving like a bird of prey. Perseus, still young, still raw, clenches the sword at his hip. He doesn't know how he'll face Medusa yet, but the air under his feet feels like destiny's rehearsal. As the landscape slides beneath him, rivers coiling like silver snakes, mountains glowing pale in the distance, you can almost hear fate whispering. The tools are gathered. The stage is set. Ahead lies Libya, desert winds, and the nightmare lair of the Gorgons. Behind lies Seriphos, where Polydeck smirks, assuming Perseus will never return. For now, though, you simply float, lulled by the rhythm of wings against the sky, carried forward on sandals stitched with starlight. The sandals carry you and Perseus over miles of terrain that shift like a dream sequence. One moment, you're gliding above green valleys dotted with olive groves, and the next, the land hardens into rolling dunes where the horizon trembles under the heat. Libya stretches out ahead, a desert vast and unending, the kind of place where your tongue feels dry just imagining it. The wind here isn't gentle, it whips, hot and sharp, tugging at Perseus' cloak, filling his ears with a hiss that sounds like whispers from the sand itself. The nymph's gifts feel heavier now, not just magical objects but burdens of expectation. Each step or flutter, since he's airborne, brings him closer to the Gorgons. You sense Athena's calm voice pushing him forward, while Hermes darts around like an impatient tour guide. The young hero's jaw tightens. He's not a fisherman's boy anymore. He's becoming the figure people will whisper about for centuries. Here's a grounding fact. The Greeks often set mythic journeys in real but distant lands. Libya was one of those edges of the map places, a region both known and exotic. Herodotus, centuries later, described Libya as teeming with strange animals and mysterious tribes. Myths filled in the blanks with monsters, as if deserts weren't intimidating enough already. As Perseus crosses the dunes, you notice the ground littered with strange shaped statues half buried in sand. Faces twisted in terror, arms frozen mid-shield. At first you think they're works of art, eerie memorials of some forgotten people. But you know better. These are the remains of Medusa's victims, petrified soldiers who once dared approach the lair. Their stone eyes stare upward, eternal warnings to anyone foolish enough to follow. A quirky tidbit: some later storytellers claimed coral reefs originated from Medusa's blood, dripping into the sea near Libya, hardening seaweed into stone. It's as if the very landscape couldn't resist joining in her legend. Perseus pauses at an oasis, kneeling beside the water, his reflection trembling on the surface. For a moment, he sees not the hero he's becoming, but a young man far from home, hands trembling as he grips the hilt of his sword. You kneel with him, feeling the heat rise from the sand, smelling the faint sweetness of palm trees swaying overhead. He drinks deeply, splashes water on his face, and steels himself. Historians still argue whether Perseus' trek through Libya was part of the original myth, or added later to explain natural landmarks. But regardless, the desert becomes a crucible, a place that strips him down to determination alone. Every gust of wind, every shimmer of mirage tests his will. And all the while, the statues loom silent company, reminding him what happens if he falters. As the sun sinks and the desert cools, Perseus rises again on winged sandals. The lair of the Gorgons lies ahead, and with it, a nightmare waiting to open its eyes. You drift with him into the twilight, the sands fading beneath you like a tide pulling back, leaving only anticipation in its wake. By the time you reach the edge of the desert, the air itself feels heavier, as though every breath carries a weight you can't quite shake. The landscape grows jagged, sharp rocks jutting up like broken teeth, and in the distance, caves yawn open, dark, damp, and uninviting. This is Gorgon country, the place where ordinary geography melts into nightmare. Before you step into that shadow, you pause to remember who Medusa actually was. She isn't just a monster conjured up to give Perseus something to swing his sword at. She has a story, and it's tragic. In the earliest tales, Medusa was simply one of 3 Gorgon sisters, monstrous from birth. But later, poets like Ovid painted her differently. Once a stunning maiden, so beautiful her hair shimmered like rivers of ink. She served as a priestess in Athena's temple until, depending on which version you prefer, she caught the attention of Poseidon. What happened next is murky and dark. Some say she was seduced, others say assaulted, but either way, Athena punished her, not Poseidon. The punishment was cruel, her flowing hair twisted into venomous snakes, her gaze cursed to turn any who looked upon her to stone. Historians still argue whether Athena's role was meant as jealous retribution, symbolic rage at desecration, or a reflection of how patriarchal myths often blamed women for suffering inflicted upon them. Whatever the case, Medusa's tragedy lingers, raising questions even modern scholars debate late into the night. Here's a grounding fact. Gorgonian masks images of Medusa's terrifying face, were used in ancient Greece as apotropaic symbols, placed on shields, temples, and even doorways to ward off evil. In other words, her image terrified but also protected. That's how complicated her myth became. Both monster and guardian dot as Perseus edges closer. You feel the tension coil around you. The air smells metallic, sharp as iron. The ground is littered with broken weapons and half-buried statues, reminders of heroes who failed. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval commentators claimed Medusa's lair was decorated with garden gnomes. Before they were garden gnomes, tiny. Frozen figures of men, animals, and even wandering gods who stumbled too close. It's absurd, yet when you glance at the stone forms scattered around, the comparison doesn't feel too far off. Perseus' mind flickers with doubt. He thinks of his mother on Seriphos, of Polydectes sneering, of Dicte's kindness. He knows this is bigger than pride now at survival, legacy, maybe even justice for Medusa herself. You hover beside him, heart thudding with the strange mix of sympathy and dread. The cave looms darker, whispering with the hiss of snakes. Somewhere inside, Medusa waits, a woman cursed into monstrosity, a victim-made villain. You can almost hear her breath echoing in the stone, as though the cave itself inhales and exhales with her. Perseus tightens his grip on Athena's shield, holds Hermes' sword close, and steps into the shadow, knowing he must face not just a beast, but the story of a woman wronged by gods. Inside the cave, the air clings to your skin like damp cloth. It smells of stone and decay, tinged with something coppery, as if the walls themselves have absorbed the echoes of screams. Perseus moves carefully, sandals brushing softly against the rock, the shield strapped before him. You trail behind, every sound amplified, the drip of water, the faint slither of scales. The distant hiss that could be wind or could be snakes. The statues are everywhere. Warriors frozen mid-stride, mouths open as if to shout warnings they never finished. Animals too, a lion crouched, stone muscles forever taut. A bird with wings outstretched, its feathers sharp as chipped marble. You weave through this eerie gallery, each figure a reminder that Medusa has already won countless times. The silence is suffocating, broken only by Perseus' breath and the steady heartbeat you swear you can hear in your ears. Here's your grounding fact. Greek sculptors sometimes deliberately posed statues in dramatic, mid-action gestures. To ancient audiences, seeing statues in a story like this would have been unsettling, because it blurred out with reality. Myths and marble collided, creating an atmosphere where you couldn't tell whether the figures were made by man or by monster. Perseus keeps his eyes on the polished bronze shield Athena gave him. Its surface reflects the cave in distorted curves, like a warped mirror at a carnival. Only this mirror decides whether you live or die. His knuckles whiten on the sword's hilt. Hermes whispers encouragement, but it's Athena's steady presence that holds his nerves in place. You feel it to that calmness, like a cool hand pressed on your forehead in fever. Medusa stirs deeper in the cave. You don't see her directly. Perseus knows better than that, but you sense her presence. The hiss grows louder, snakes writhing, scales scraping against stone. A low growl hums through the ground, making pebbles tremble at your feet. She isn't just a monster waiting for a fight. She's a curse wrapped in flesh, weary of solitude, lashing out because it's all she has left. A quirky tidbit, in some late Roman versions, Medusa was said to hum lullabies to her snakes as though they were her children. Imagine that this terrifying figure rocking her serpentine babies, to sleep with the soft murmur of a song no human ear could bear. Perseus crouches lower, shield angled to catch just enough reflection. He inches closer, every step deliberate, breath shallow. His eyes flick to the mirrored surface, the faint outline of a figure reclining among coils, head crowned with living vipers. The sight alone chills your blood. Historians still argue whether Medusa was meant to embody pure horror or serve as a metaphor for dangerous female power. One reason she continues to fascinate art, literature, and politics to this day. Closer still. The shield trembles slightly as Perseus steadies his arm. The cave's heartbeat quickens, the hissing louder. The statues pressing in like an audience waiting for the final act. You want to close your eyes, but you can't. Neither can Perseus. Every nerve in his body screams as he raises the sword, knowing one wrong glance could turn him into the next exhibit in this gallery of the damned. Perseus takes another step, the mirror-bright shield trembling as his own reflection swims, alongside the distorted outline of Medusa. You watch the blurred figure on its surface, her body curled among coils of serpents, head crowning with vipers that sway and taste the air. Her breathing is slow, heavy, and you can almost imagine her dreaming, unaware that fate tiptoes closer with every heartbeat. The statues behind you loom like a silent choir, their stony eyes locked in eternal witness. He lifts the sword, its curved edge catching the dim flicker of firelight from the cave's heart. The hissing grows restless. The snakes sense danger even if their mistress still sleeps. One snake snaps in the air, a sound sharp as tearing fabric. Perseus steadies himself, knees bent, shield angled just so. This is no reckless leap. It's patience, calculation, Athena's strategy beating in his chest. Here's your historical anchor. The Greeks practiced ****, vivid descriptions of objects in art and literature. The polished bronze shield described here is more than a prop, it reflects a cultural truth. Ancient warriors really did use mirrored bronze to catch glimpses of themselves and their enemies. Perseus, in that sense, isn't only mythical, he's also a reflection of Greek military cleverness. The cave quakes with sound as Perseus lunges. He doesn't look directly. His gaze stays fixed on the mirror's warped surface. With one swift, decisive stroke, the harp blade arcs through the air. The sound is wet and final, like rope snapping under tension. Medusa's body jerks, snakes thrashing wildly, hissing a chorus of fury and grief. Her head, severed, falls into the sand with a dull thud. Eyes still burning with a power too dangerous to meet. You exhale, only then realizing you've been holding your breath. Perseus drops to his knees for a moment, clutching the shield, chest heaving. Victory, yes, but not without sorrow. Even in triumph, the cave feels mournful, the air heavy with the sense that something once beautiful, then cursed, has now been silenced. A quirky tidbit? Some ancient sources claimed that when Medusa's head hit the ground, her snakes hissed louder than thunder, and the noise alone was enough to frighten flocks of birds miles away into dropping dead. Mid-flight. Imagine explaining that in your local village. No, really. The chickens just fainted out of the sky. Perseus quickly remembers Athena's instructions. He lifts the kibis, the magical pouch, and carefully slides Medusa's head inside. The snakes still writhe, eyes glowing faintly even from within, as though the curse refuses to die. The pouch bulges with menace, humming faintly like an angry beehive. Perseus ties it tight and pulls the strap over his shoulder, his body sagging under both relief and the weight of what he's carrying. Historians still argue whether this moment was meant to symbolize a shift in Greek heroism, from brute force to cunning, from strength to strategy. Whatever its meaning, it leaves you standing in a cave filled with stone ghosts, next to a young man who has just stared down horror without ever looking it in the eye. The silence returns, broken only by Perseus' ragged breathing and the occasional hiss from the pouch at his side. The deed is done. The impossible has been carved into reality with a single mirrored strike. But you sense the story hasn't eased, it has only sharpened the path ahead, full of gods, monsters, and the long flight home. For a heartbeat, the cave is still. Then, as if the earth itself remembers what just happened, the silence splits. From the ragged neck of Medusa's fallen body, something wondrous bursts forth. First, a gleam of silver-white light, then the pounding of hooves against stone. A winged horse Pegasus erupts into the air, mane whipping like a banner, wings stretching so wide they scrape the cavern walls. You blink against the brilliance as Pegasus whinnies, a sound that vibrates through your chest like thunder made of music. But he isn't alone. From the same blood, another form rises, Chrysaor, a warrior, or sometimes described as a giant, depending on which version of the story you favor. Some say he clutched a golden sword the moment he stepped into existence. Others depict him more vaguely, as though even the ancients couldn't quite agree what to do with him. Historians still argue whether Chrysaor was meant as a symbol of Medusa's lingering dignity, or simply a mythic placeholder for something epic popped out. Either way, The cave suddenly feels crowded. Perseus stumbles back, shield raised instinctively. He didn't come here expecting magical children to leap from his enemy's body. Yet here they are, one destined to soar across countless other myths, the other destined to vanish into obscurity. That's the thing about Greek stories. Even side characters born in spurts of blood might carry legacies that ripple for centuries. Here's a grounding fact. Pegasus became one of the most enduring symbols in ancient art and literature, often associated with poetic inspiration. Even centuries later, Roman poets linked Pegasus with the Muses and the Fountain of Hippocrene. The image of a winged horse didn't fade, it galloped straight into Western imagination, lingering on everything from medieval heraldry to modern fantasy novels. A quirky tidbit? Some late commentators joked that Pegasus, upon birth, kicked a hole in the cave roof just to make his exit more dramatic. Imagine Perseus shielding his head as chunks of limestone rain down while the horse goes, "Sorry, I don't do doors." Perseus, still reeling, realizes he cannot linger. The other Gorgons, Stheno and Euryale, have heard the commotion. Their screams rip through the night, raw and furious, vibrating the stones around you. Perseus doesn't wait to see them emerge. He slings the kibbasis tighter against his side, nods once toward Pegasus, who takes off into the darkness and turns to flee. The cave shakes with the sound of pursuit. The remaining sisters, immortal and enraged, crash against the walls, their wails cutting the night like knives. Perseus' sandals lift him into the air just as claws rake the spot where he stood. The cap of Hades hums as he pulls it over his head, vanishing from mortal sight. But the sisters don't need eyes, they can smell blood, hear wings, feel vibrations. The flight is frantic. You soar with him through the night, the stars blurring, the desert whipping beneath you. The pouch at his side rides as though Medusa's head resents being contained. Behind, the Gorgon's cries fade, but you know they'll never forgive. Perseus has escaped, but the world has shifted to beings birthed from blood, and a hero now carrying a weapon that terrifies even gods. The desert wind lashes against your face as Perseus rockets into the night sky, sandals beating the air with invisible rhythm. Behind him, the shrieks of Stheno and Euryale still echo, a banshee chorus vibrating through the stars. They are immortal, untouchable, yet robbed of their sister. Their cries sound less like rage and more like grief, a reminder that even monsters loved one another. You glance back and shudder at the thought of what they would do if they caught him. Perseus tightens his grip on the kibbasis, the pouch where Medusa's head rides faintly. Snakes hissing muffled protests. The cap of Hades shrouds him in darkness, hiding him from the sister's sight. But it doesn't silence the pounding of his heart. He knows invisibility won't stop claws that swipe blindly through the air. Every wing beat is a gamble. Here's your grounding fact. The Greeks often described Hades' cap of invisibility, called the asterisk helm of darkness asterisk, as a tool not just for hiding from eyes but from all perception, sight, hearing, even thought. Some scholars argue it represented the inevitability of death itself, unseen, unavoidable, slipping past without warning. In Perseus' case, though, it's basically the mythic equivalent of stealth mode. The chase rages across landscapes. He darts over rivers that glisten like molten bronze, past jagged cliffs that tear at the horizon. The sisters roar, their cries shaking birds from trees and scattering jackals in the desert. Perseus dodges a crag where stone fingers jut upward, remembering too well that these aren't just rocks, they might once have been men, frozen in the act of fleeing. A quirky tidbit, some vase painters showed Perseus flying upside down, sandals flailing like a panicked swimmer, just to emphasize how chaotic this escape must have been. Imagine the poor hero trying to look cool while essentially somersaulting through the air. Athena's voice threads into his mind, calm and precise, asterisk steady your breath. Keep to shadows, don't falter. Asterisk Hermes, on the other hand, zips alongside laughing, cheering Perseus on as though it's a game of tag. You trail close, feeling both the terror and the absurdity the gods may be helping. But it's still one very young man holding the deadliest handbag in history. Historians still argue whether Perseus' flight was meant to symbolize triumph over chaos or simple survival by luck and borrowed gifts. Either way, every gust of wind feels like fate rushing past your ears. Finally, The screams behind fade. The sisters, unable to track him through the night sky, collapse back into their cave, their wails dissolving into a low moan that carries for miles. Perseus doesn't relax. He keeps flying, higher and farther, the air thinning and stars sharpening above. The world spreads beneath like a painted map, deserts giving way to coastlines, seas glittering under the moon. Only when dawn breaks, painting the sky pink and gold, does Perseus dare to breathe easier. He pulls the cap from his head, the world shimmering back into focus, and clutches the pouch closer. Medusa's head is his now, heavy with dread and promise. The worst is behind him, or so he thinks. In Greek myth, the real trouble always starts after you think you've won. The desert fades beneath Perseus as he glides eastward, but the relic he carries refuses to stay quiet. The kibisis at his side trembles, snakes hissing and rattling within as though the head resents confinement. Every so often the pouch bulges, the faint glow of those cursed eyes pressing against the fabric. Perseus tightens the strap and mutters to himself, like a traveler trying to calm an unruly pet. You can almost laugh, except you remember that what's writhing inside has turned armies to stone. As he flies over the Libyan sands, drops of blood leak through the seams, falling into the earth below. Each splatter births chaos. Where the blood hits, serpents coil out of the sand, slithering into the dunes with a venomous hunger. In other tales, the drops spill into the sea, hardening seaweed into coral, as though Medusa's power continues to sculpt the natural world even after death. Historians still argue whether these details were ancient attempts to explain real phenomena, snakes in deserts, coral reefs along the African coast, or just poetic flourishes to stretch the myth's influence over the map. Here's your grounding fact. The Greeks frequently used myths as explanations for natural landmarks. For example, volcanic eruptions were linked to Typhon's buried body, while the Nile's flooding was tied to divine tears. Perseus scattering serpents across Libya fits this pattern perfectly, an ancient story to account for why the land seemed so crawling with danger. One quirky tidbit: some Roman writers claimed the spilled blood also produced tiny worms, which slithered into fig trees and became the first caterpillars. Imagine Perseus unknowingly responsible not just for snakes and coral, but also butterflies. Hero of monsters, patron of gardens. Perseus doesn't notice the chaos below. His eyes are fixed on the horizon, his breath steadying after the mad chase. Yet you sense he feels the pouch's restless energy. It's as if carrying Medusa's head has made him part of her story, her curse seeping into his journey. He tries not to dwell on it, better to focus on the next step, the next breath, the next sweep of his winged sandals. Athena's voice threads through his mind again. Asterisk, control what you can. Let the rest fall. Asterisk, he repeats the mantra, even as more drops slip from the bag, birthing serpents that vanish into the shifting sands. The desert, already hostile, now crawls with new life that will outlast him. You wonder if the people who later trekked across these dunes ever cursed Perseus for making their journeys more dangerous. Above it all, the sky lightens, the sun stretching over endless golden waves. Perseus presses onward, unaware that the blood dripping behind him has already redrawn the world. One snake, one coral branch, one whisper of legend at a time. As dawn settles into a harsher midday light, Perseus drifts toward the western edge of the world, or at least what the Greeks imagined that edge to be. Mountains rise from the horizon like slumbering giants, their peaks jagged against the sky. Here lives Atlas, the titan cursed to hold the heavens aloft. You can almost feel the weight pressing down on your shoulders as you approach. The vast dome of sky straining against invisible arms. Atlas towers in the distance, a figure so massive he seems carved from the very mountains he leans upon. His hair is tangled with clouds, his skin etched with cracks where rivers trickle down like sweat. Some storytellers describe him as endlessly patient, a cosmic laborer resigned to his fate. Others paint him bitter, ready to crush intruders who wander too close. Historians still argue whether Atlas was originally a god of astronomy, his holding up the sky a metaphor for charting the stars, before later myths literally weighed him down. Perseus descends cautiously, sandals brushing against thin air, the kibisis heavy at his side. He calls out, voice small against the Titan's vastness. Atlas turns, eyes glowing with suspicion. He has heard of Perseus, perhaps. Or maybe he simply despises any mortal bold enough to enter his domain. Leave, the Titan rumbles, his voice a landslide, or be crushed. Perseus hesitates. He isn't here to fight. But Atlas, already burdened, refuses visitors. The air thickens with threat, and you can sense the inevitability in Perseus' hand as it drifts toward the pouch. He doesn't boast this time, doesn't warn. He simply unties the strap, pulls the kibises open just enough and turns the head outward. The effect is immediate. Medusa's eyes, still blazing with that curse, meet Atlas. His roar cuts short. His limbs stiffen. The weight of the heavens freezes him in place, body hardening, veins locking into stone. In moments, the Titan is no longer flesh and bone, but a mountain itself. His vast frame stretching across the horizon, crags forming where his beard once was, valleys opening where his muscles flexed. You stand in awe as Atlas becomes the Atlas Mountains, a range that still exists today, myth woven seamlessly into geography. Here's your grounding fact. The Atlas Mountains in North Africa are indeed named after this myth. Ancient travelers saw the range as the petrified body of the Titan, linking geography with story in a way that gave the land a mythic weight. A quirky tidbit? Some medieval mapmakers drew Atlas literally holding up the edges of their parchment, as if the Titan not only supported the heavens but also their entire worldview. Imagine poor Atlas realizing he wasn't just cursed to hold the sky. He had to hold awkward medieval maps too. Perseus closes the pouch quickly, chest heaving. He didn't want to use Medusa's head, but in this harsh world, survival and boundaries blur. Atlas is silent now, his vast stone form rising forever as a reminder of the moment. Perseus takes off again, sandals beating the air, carrying the burden of knowing that one glance has the power to change God's men, and landscapes alike. The air cools as Perseus leaves the stone husk of Atlas behind, his sandals carrying him eastward over the glittering Mediterranean. The endless waves shimmer like hammered bronze under the sun, stretching so far that even a winged hero feels small above them. You glide with him, lulled by the rhythm of the sea until something interrupts the horizon. A coast, jagged and pale, where a crowd gathers near the surf dot as Perseus descends. The sound of waves mixes with shouts carried on the wind. People cluster on the rocks, their robes snapping in the sea breeze, their voices sharp with fear. And then you see why. Chained to a boulder just offshore is a young woman, her arms stretched painfully, her hair whipping in the salt spray. Her name is Andromeda, though Perseus doesn't know that yet. He only knows he stumbled into another nightmare. From the depths, the water bulges, darker than storm clouds. A sea monster rises, its scales slick with foam, its maw opening wide enough to swallow oxen whole. The crowd screams, but no one rushes forward. They can't. This is a sacrifice, demanded by the gods or perhaps by something older, and Andromeda has been offered as tribute. Here's your grounding fact. The Greeks often used myths to explain constellations. Andromeda, Perseus, and the sea monster known as Cetus were later immortalized in the night sky. When you look up on a clear night and trace those stars, you're seeing the frozen memory of this very moment. Perseus hovers, torn. His quest is Medusa's head, yet here is a woman about to die. Maybe it's instinct. Maybe it's Athena's whisper. Maybe it's simply that heroism means helping even when the script doesn't demand it. Whatever the reason, he acts. Before you rush forward with him, you pause to consider Andromeda's backstory. She is the daughter of Cepheus and Cassiopeia, rulers of this land. Cassiopeia, in her vanity, once boasted that she was more beautiful than the Nereids, sea nymphs beloved of Poseidon. Offended, the god of the sea sent a monster to ravage their coast. The only way to appease him? Sacrifice their daughter. Historians still argue whether this story was meant as moral punishment for vanity, or simply another example of daughters paying for their parents' mistakes. A quirky tidbit? Some later writers claimed Cassiopeia was punished further by being strapped to a chair in the night sky, spinning awkwardly forever in the constellation that bears her name. Picture that an eternal cosmic timeout. Perseus scans the scene, a chained maiden, a despairing crowd, a monster rising higher with every wave. His hand drifts to the pouch at his side. Inside, Medusa's head hisses faintly, as if sensing another chance to wreak havoc. Perseus sets his jaw. This battle won't be about stone glares, it'll be about steel, courage, and timing. The crowd gasps as he swoops lower, sandaled feet skimming the surf. Andromeda lifts her head, eyes wide not with hope but with disbelief, as though she never imagined rescue was even possible. You feel the air thicken, every heartbeat slowing as the sea monster's shadow swallows the shore. A new trial has begun, unplanned yet unavoidable. And Perseus knows that destiny doesn't wait for permission. The waves churn like boiling water as Cetus. The sea monster rises higher, its massive head glistening with foam and barnacles. Its jaws snap shut with a crack that echoes across the shoreline, sending shivers through the gathered crowd. You hover beside Perseus as he steadies his breath, wind sandals carrying him just above the spray. The smell of salt and decay burns your nostrils. This is no ordinary fish, it's a God-sent punishment, a living disaster. Andromeda strains against her chains, eyes wide, hair plastered to her face by seawater. She isn't screaming perhaps, she's already screamed herself hoarse, but her gaze locks on Perseus, silent pleading cutting sharper than any words. In that instant, he decides. He cannot let her be consumed. Heroism is rarely planned. It arrives like lightning, and he grabs it with both hands. Sword drawn, Perseus swoops low, bronze blade glinting in the sunlight. Cetus thrashes, its tail smashing against the boulder where Andromeda is bound. The impact sprays seawater like a storm, drenching you both. Perseus dives, slashing at the monster's snout. The blade cuts deep, and the creature bellows, a sound that rattles your teeth. Here's your grounding fact. The Greeks often visualized sea monsters not as single species, but as a mashup of horrors. Serpent bodies bore tusks, dragon heads. Cetus was a catch-all term used even later in Latin to describe whales. So, while you might picture a dragon, a serpent, or even a leviathan, the ancients were probably thinking of a nightmare hybrid. Perseus circles, dodging the monster's snapping jaws. Spray blinds him. The shield on his arm rattles under the force of impact. Cetus lunges again, mouth gaping, and you can see the reflection of Perseus' tiny form in its wet teeth. At the last second, he twists, slicing across its eye. The beast roars, thrashing so violently that waves surge onto the shore, forcing the crowd to scatter. A quirky tidbit? Some later stories claimed Perseus actually pulled Medusa's head from the pouch and petrified Cetus mid-leap, turning it into the rocky formation known as Joppa's Cliffs. Imagine stumbling across a seaside rock and saying, "Oh, that's just where the hero froze a monster." Others, though, insisted he won with sword alone, because sometimes you don't need nuclear options when you've got sheer determination. Historians still argue which version came first. Was Perseus the daring swordsman, or the cunning trickster wielding his grisly trophy? Either way, the scene was so iconic that poets, painters, and even stargazers immortalized it. Look up at the constellations tonight, and you'll see Cetus and Andromeda, and Perseus still locked in their eternal tableau. Back in the mythic present, Perseus finally finds his opening. With a shout swallowed by the roar of surf, he plunges downward, driving the harp sword deep into Cetus' neck. The monster convulses, tail lashing, spray exploding skyward. Then, with a final shudder, the beast sinks beneath the waves, leaving only blood swirling like crimson ink across the foam. The crowd erupts, voices tumbling together in disbelief and joy. Andromeda sags against her chains, exhausted but alive. Perseus lands lightly on the rocks beside her, sword dripping seawater, chest heaving. For the first time since Medusa's cave, you see him smile, not the cocky grin of a boastful youth, but the quiet relief of a man who has saved a life. The air along the shoreline is thick with relief. The crowd surges forward, no longer spectators but a chorus of gratitude. Some fall to their knees. Others lift their arms skyward as if Poseidon himself might relent now that his monster has fallen. Perseus, dripping seawater, helps Andromeda down from the rock. Her wrists are raw from the chains, her skin goose-fleshed from the chill. Yet her eyes shine with the bewildered brightness of someone who cannot believe she's still breathing. Her parents, Cepheus and Cassiopeia, rush forward. The king's robes are soaked at the hem, the queen's makeup streaked from tears. They throw themselves before Perseus, promising him rewards, kingdoms, anything he might ask. But Perseus has only one request to Andromeda's hand. In some tellings, this demand sounds abrupt, almost transactional, but here on the wet rocks, you sense something gentler. He's not bartering. He's simply seizing the thread of fate that has already entwined them. The betrothal is arranged quickly. Torches are lit, garlands hung, music coaxed from pipes and drums. You watch the island transform from a site of sacrifice into a stage for celebration. But in Greek myth, joy rarely goes unchallenged. Even as laughter bubbles and wine spills, a shadow stirs at the edge of the festivities. Andromeda had been promised already to Phineus, her uncle, a man who arrives now with armed supporters. Storming into the hall like uninvited guests at the world's worst wedding crash, Phineus bellows, his voice booming with betrayal, demanding his bride and denouncing Perseus as a thief. The hall falls silent. Torches flicker in the tension. Perseus rises slowly, hand drifting toward the pouch at his side. You can almost feel the shift in the air, the party teetering on the edge of a battlefield. Here's your grounding fact. Greek weddings were often scenes of political tension. Marriages weren't just about love. They were alliances, deals, and sometimes excuses for war. Stories like Andromeda's capture this reality, magnified into myth. The clash erupts. Spears fly, shields rattle, wine jars shatter underfoot. Perseus fights with the speed of Hermes, cutting down those who rush him. But the hall fills with enemies, more than he can strike alone. Andromeda clutches her mother, Cassiopeia wailing as chaos unfolds. A quirky tidbit? Some vase painters depicted this scene almost like slapstick warriors, tumbling over overturned tables, food flying everywhere. Perseus mid-swipe with the harp while ducks and chickens scatter across the floor. It's hard not to picture a mythic brawl doubling as a food fight, yet the danger is no joke. Outnumbered, Perseus reaches for his final weapon. With a shout, he yanks open the kibisis. The head of Medusa glares forth, its serpents hissing, its eyes blazing even in death. Instantly, Phineus and his men freeze mid-attack, expressions twisted in rage and shock. Stone spreads through them like wildfire, turning flesh to marble, shouts to silence. The hall grows still, filled with statues instead of foes. Historians still argue whether this moment was meant as a moral. Perseus punishing treachery with divine justice or simply as a reminder that he carried the most terrifying weapon in mythology. Either way, when he closes the pouch again, the room is eerily calm, and only the crackle of torches remains. Perseus turns back to Andromeda, who stands trembling but alive. The wedding feast has transformed again, from celebration to carnage to stunned survival. And in her eyes, you see not fear but acceptance. She knows her fate is bound to a man who carries both salvation and terror in the same hand. The long journey home begins not with triumph but with a quiet determination. Perseus, now joined by Andromeda, sails back across the sea, the kibisis heavy at his side. The pouch seems to hum faintly, as though Medusa's head resents the long ride. You sit at the prow with him, salt spray hitting your face, while the new bride rests nearby. Her hair tangled with sea breeze, but her gaze steady. She's no longer the chained maiden, she's a queen in waiting, about to face the mess her husband left behind. Seriphos rises on the horizon at last, its rocky cliffs sharp against the waves. The island looks the same as when Perseus left, fishing nets drying in the sun, gulls circling overhead, waves slapping against the pier. But beneath that calm exterior, tension simmers. Polydex still rules, still leers at Danae, and still believes Perseus has failed. Here's your grounding fact in Greek societies. Kings often consolidated power by controlling marriages, forcing unions to cement loyalty. Polydect's desire for Danae wasn't just lust, it was a way to dominate her family and erase Perseus as an obstacle. The fisherman Dictys greets Perseus at the shore, relief flooding his weathered face. He whispers quickly of what's happened, how Polydex has harassed Danae, how she's hidden in the temple of Athena for safety, how the king scoffs at the idea of Perseus ever returning alive. The news stiffens Perseus' spine. This isn't just about keeping a boast anymore, it's about justice. Polydectes has gathered his court in a hall filled with swaggering nobles, laughing over wine and mocking the absent boy who thought he could slay a Gorgon. You can almost hear their jeers spilling into the streets. When Perseus strides through the doors, the room stills, silence crashing down like a wave. He carries the pouch, his hand resting on it like a threat no one can see. A quirky tidbit. Some later versions claimed Perseus disguised himself upon return, mingling among the guests until he revealed the head, like the world's deadliest surprise party trick. Vase paintings sometimes show him smiling smugly as the nobles realize too late what's about to happen. But for now, the hall is tense. Polydectes sneers, demanding proof of Perseus' quest. Dinar, safe at Athena's shrine, isn't here to see her son return, but Dictys stands quietly at the back, waiting. The air thickens, torches guttering, as if the gods themselves lean closer. Perseus empties the kibbasis slowly, his voice low and even. You wanted Medusa's head. Behold, the pouch opens just enough. The room erupts in gasps, then silence. Stone creeps across faces twisted in disbelief, spreading over arms that had just raised goblets, over mouths frozen mid-laugh. The court becomes a gallery of statues, their mockery carved forever in marble. Historians still argue whether this scene was symbolic Medusa's power, sweeping away corrupt authority or simply mythic justice delivered neat and swift. Either way, the message is clear. Perseus has returned and he will not be mocked. The hall falls silent. Only Perseus, Andromeda, and Dictys remain flesh among the stone. Justice, brutal and absolute, has come to Seriphos. The echo of silence in Polydectes' hall feels heavier than any battle cry. Rows of nobles stand frozen in the midst of laughter, their goblets forever raised, their sneers immortalized in stone. Polydectes himself is a grotesque monument, mouth curled into a half-mocking smile, eyes wide with the realization that came just a moment too late. The torchlight flickers across marble faces, making the whole hall feel like some twisted art gallery no one asked for. Perseus lowers the kibbasis, tying its strap with steady hands. There's no triumph in his face, only resolve. The deed had to be done. Dinar will no longer cower in temples, hiding from a king's lust. The island breathes easier. Andromeda, standing close, touches his arm lightly, her eyes lingering on the statues with a mixture of awe and unease. You can almost hear her thought, this man carries a weapon that can destroy, but also protect. Dictys enters quietly, gazing at the stone remnants of his brother and the courtiers who enabled him. There's no glee in his expression, just the weary acceptance of someone who has lived long under tyranny. Perseus turns to him and, without flourish, names him the new ruler of Seriphos. For the first time, the island will have a king who actually knows the sea, who has felt the salt in his hair and the ache of hauling nets. Here's your grounding fact. Greek myths often rewarded humble characters like Dictys, elevating them after the downfall of tyrants. It was a way of affirming that justice didn't just punish the corrupt, but raised up the good. In this case, a fisherman becomes king not by scheming, but by being steady and kind. A quirky tidbit? Some later storytellers claimed that Dictys' first act as king was outlawing feasts, where people bragged about impossible quests, so no one else would end up shipping their kids off to fight snake-haired monsters. It's almost believable, given the family history. Historians still argue whether this moment was always part of Perseus' cycle, or added later to give the myth a neat political resolution. Either way, the Court of Stone remains a warning. Hubris and cruelty invite divine punishment, sometimes through the hands of mortals. Dinar emerges at last from Athena's temple, her face lighting with relief when she sees her son alive. The reunion is tender, the kind that doesn't need words. She leans into him, weary but safe, and Perseus holds her with the quiet strength of a man who has fulfilled more than a boast. He has safeguarded his family. Yet, as you linger in the Hall of Statues, a truth settles, the story is not finished. Myths rarely end cleanly. Perseus still carries Medusa's head, still walks with gods watching over his shoulder, and still lives under a prophecy that no blade or bag can prevent. For now, Seriphos is free, but destiny waits beyond its shores for a time. Peace settles over Seriphos like a warm tide. Dana walks freely again, no longer glancing over her shoulder, and Dictys rules with the quiet practicality of a fisherman who knows the value of patience. Nets are mended, ships return safely, and the island breathes easier. But Perseus is not the sort to linger. Heroes never are. The sandals itch for flight, the pouch at his side hums with restless menace, and Athena's whisper reminds him that fate is not finished with him yet. So Perseus, with Andromeda at his side, chooses to leave Seriphos. He has done his duty here, avenged his mother, freed the island, toppled a tyrant. Now he must build something of his own. You watch as their ship pushes off from the harbour, Dana waving goodbye, Dictys nodding solemnly from the shore. Behind them, polydecked stone court still stands, silent as a warning to any who might forget. The sea stretches open again, carrying them toward Argos, the land of Perseus' birth. It is a strange homecoming, for he has never known it, yet his blood is tied there. His grandfather Acraseus still rules, the man who once locked his daughter in a bronze chamber to escape prophecy. You can almost feel that prophecy stirring now like a storm cloud on the horizon. Here's your grounding fact. In many Greek myths, the cycle of prophecy is unavoidable. No matter how far a character travels or how clever their strategies, the thread of fate wins back to its original knot. Acraseus' fear of Perseus' birth has not disappeared. It has only waited. On the journey, Perseus and Andromeda begin to carve out the beginnings of a dynasty. Some storytellers say they founded the city of Mycenae, which later became one of the greatest centers of Greek power. Others suggest their children spread across Greece, seeding lines of kings and warriors. Historians still argue which version came first, but all agree the world ripples outward from their union. A quirky tidbit? One ancient chronicle claimed that Perseus' descendants were so numerous that when you counted the kings of Greece, you would trip over a Persid every third throne. It's an exaggeration, sure, but not far off. His bloodline supposedly leads to Heracles, Eurystheus, and even kings of Persia, as if myth couldn't resist planting one family tree in every kingdom. For now, though, Perseus is just a man with a new wife, a mother freed from fear, and a destiny he can't yet see. He sails into the horizon, the pouch at his side still heavy, wings of the sandals itching for their next flight. You drift with him, lulled by the waves and the faint hum of inevitability. He has left behind one story, but another waits on the shore ahead, one written long before he was born. The ship glides into the Gulf of Argos, sails billowing in a steady wind. The coastline glimmers in the sun, dotted with villages and olive groves. A land Perseus has never truly called home, but that carries his bloodline like an unshakable anchor. You walk with him down the gangplank, sandals crunching against the pebbled shore. Andromeda, radiant but weary from the voyage, stays close. Dana, her eyes shadowed with memory, tightens her shawl. The closer they come to Argos, the more that old prophecy stirs Acraseus' fear that his grandson would one day be his undoing. The people of Argos greet Perseus with cautious curiosity. They've heard tales carried by sailors of Medusa slain, of a maiden rescued, of a tyrant turned to stone. He is not just a stranger anymore, but a name that ripples ahead of him. Acraseus, however, does not see a hero. He sees doom walking through his gates. Here's your grounding fact in Greek culture. Prophecies weren't suggestions, they were inevitabilities. Kings like Acraseus went to absurd lengths to escape them, often creating the very circumstances they dreaded. Myth after myth insists on the same truth. Fate finds you, whether you hide in palaces or prisons. Acraseus, trembling with age but still clinging to his throne, cannot bring himself to welcome Perseus. Some versions say he fled Argos entirely, hoping to outpace destiny. Others insist he stayed, his eyes never leaving his grandson as though watching for a knife. Historians still argue whether the flight of Acraseus was added later to soften the story, or whether the Greeks always loved the irony of a man sprinting straight toward fate. And fate, when it comes, wears the disguise of ordinary sport. Perseus, restless, joins athletic games held in Larissa. He competes in the discus throw, muscles honed from years of hauling nets and wielding blades. The crowd cheers as the bronze disc arcs high into the sky, glittering like a second sun. But the throw goes wide. Too wide. It strikes a man standing at the edge of the field, snapping life away in a heartbeat. The field falls silent. Whispers spread like wildfire. The man struck is Acraseus. The prophecy is fulfilled not in battle, not in rebellion, but in an accident at play. You feel the weight of irony press against your chest. All the locks, the chambers, the exiles, the fears undone by a single throw of chance. A quirky tidbit? Some later retellings insisted Perseus didn't just throw a discus, but a quoit, a kind of heavy ring, almost like an ancient frisbee. Imagine killing your grandfather with what is essentially a mythic sporting toy. Perseus falls to his knees, grief-stricken. He never sought Acraseus' death. He never wanted this fulfillment. But fate doesn't care about intentions. The prophecy is satisfied. The cycle closes with brutal precision, leaving Perseus hollow in victory. As the body is carried away, you sense the gods watching silently. No laughter, no applause, only the quiet satisfaction of inevitability. Perseus is a hero, yes, but also a reminder that no one, not even the favored of Athena, escapes destiny's hand. The games dissolve into mourning. Acraseus' body is carried away, shrouded in linen. The murmurs of the crowd like dry leaves rustling in the wind. Perseus stands apart, shoulders heavy, the discus still lying in the field like a weapon that never meant to be won. He knows the truth. He has become the very thing his grandfather feared, not through rebellion or vengeance, but through the absurd cruelty of fate. You walk with him, the stadium echoing with silence where cheers had filled the air only moments before. Instead of claiming Argos, Perseus makes a choice. Grief and guilt pressed heavily on his chest. He cannot sit on the throne that came to him by accident, or worse, by blood. So he exchanges kingdoms with a relative, Megapenthus, and moves to Terins instead. It's an unusual decision. Heroes often seize crowns when they fall into their laps. But Perseus chooses humility. Perhaps he hopes distance will free him from the shadow of the prophecy. Here's your grounding fact. Myths often use such exchanges of power to explain why certain cities rose in prominence. By linking Perseus to Terins, storytellers tied the hero directly into the genealogy of Mycenaean Greece, giving later rulers a mythic ancestor. Even architecture joined the legend. The great walls of Terins were so massive that later Greeks claimed Perseus and his descendants built them with the help of Cyclops. Andromeda walks beside him into this new life, her presence steady, her gaze fixed forward. Together they raise children whose names will echo for centuries. Perseus, said to be the ancestor of the Persians, Alcaeus, forefather of mighty Heracles, and others who scatter into dynasties across the Mediterranean. Historians still argue whether these genealogies were created later to give legitimacy to foreign kings or whether the myths always carried the seeds of empire. A quirky tidbit? Some ancient storytellers joked that Perseus, the sun sent east, was so cranky as a child that Perseus gladly shipped him off to another land, muttering, "Fine, let him start his own empire somewhere far away." Mythology, even at its grandest, couldn't resist inserting a little family sarcasm. The line of Perseus spreads wide. Cities claim him as founder, bloodlines trace back to him, and even poets centuries later call upon his name as proof of heroic descent. You can feel the ripples stretch outward like stones thrown into a vast pond, reaching even beyond Greece itself. Yet Perseus himself remains a quieter figure now. He has slain monsters, toppled kings, fulfilled prophecy, and birthed dynasties. The fire of adventure dims into the softer glow of legacy. He knows what he carries, not just the pouch with Medusa's head, which still hums faintly in the background, but the burden of being both savior and curse. Both builder and destroyer dot you drift beside him as he walks the walls of Terins at twilight. The stone glows orange under the fading sun, the air warm and heavy with cicadas. He pauses, looking out across the land, Andromeda's hand resting gently in his. The story of Perseus no longer belongs just to him. It belongs to the future, to the children who will inherit both his triumphs and his tragedies. Time softens Perseus' tale, but the one object that never loses its sharpness is the head of Medusa. For years, he keeps it close, tucked inside the kibbasis, using it sparingly but decisively. Whenever threats loom too great for sword or shield, he is only to reveal that face and watch chaos harden into silence. The power frightens even him, though, and in quieter moments. He wonders if carrying it makes him hero or monster. Athena has her answer ready. Eventually, Perseus entrusts Medusa's head to the goddess herself. She fixes it to her aegis, that terrifying shield or breastplate she carries into battle. From then on, the Gorgony and the staring, snake-crowned visage becomes one of the most enduring symbols in Greek culture. Soldiers paint it on armor, craftsmen carve it into door lintels, mothers even sew it into baby clothes, hoping to scare away sickness. Here's your grounding fact. Archaeologists have found Medusa's face everywhere in the ancient world, from coins and pottery to temple pediments. It wasn't just decoration. It was apotropaic magic, a way to deflect harm by confronting it with something more horrifying. Imagine tucking your child into bed under a quilt embroidered with the world's scariest monster, and you start to understand how practical and symbolic fear merged in daily life. A quirky tidbit? Some Romans were so fond of the Gorgonian that they even carved it on spoons. So, every bite of soup came with a side of nightmare fuel. Dinnerware as security system. Historians still argue about what Medusa's head symbolized beyond protection. Was it female rage weaponized into defense? Was it a warning against hubris, or a reminder that beauty and terror often share a face? The debates stretch across centuries, proof that the myth never lost its bite. Perseus, meanwhile, fades from the center of the story. His deeds echo through temples, his children grow into rulers. But the image of Medusa overshadows him. In some ways, she outlives her slayer. Her head becomes a badge for Athena, a ward for households, a talisman sailors paint on their ships. Even today, when you see her coiled hair and wide eyes, you're brushing against the same symbol the Greeks believed could stop evil mid-step. Perseus doesn't resent this. Heroes often dissolve into the stories they spark, and he has sparked plenty. He walks the walls of Turin's hand in Andromeda's, watching stars settle into constellations that bear their names. The sea whispers at the horizon, the same sea that once nearly drowned him in a chest, the same sea where he rescued a chained maiden. The kibbasis is empty now, but its former occupant still speaks louder than anything he could say. The legacy of Perseus may be his line of kings and heroes, but the legacy of Medusa is stranger her face, her curse, her power stitched into the fabric of culture itself. Together, they prove that myths don't end neatly. They seep into walls, coins, songs, and even the symbols we still use. Long after the heroes themselves fade into dust, years pass, and the edges of Perseus' life soften, though the stories about him never do. In Turin's, his children grow into princes and princesses, names that will one day echo through dynasties. The walls rise higher, stones so massive that later Greeks will insist Cyclops must have helped place them. Perseus himself becomes less the boy who once boasted in Polydectes Hall, and more the quiet patriarch of a family that will ripple across the Mediterranean world. He and Andromeda walk the city together, her presence always beside him, steady as the sea that first bound their fates. She too becomes part of legend, not just the maiden chained to a rock, but the mother of kings. Her beauty transformed into wisdom, her suffering into lineage. Dana, older now, lives in peace at last, free of confinement and cruelty. Sometimes, on warm evenings, the family gathers to tell stories of their journeys, though none speak too long about Medusa. The gods, of course, never stop watching. Athena keeps Medusa's head on her aegis, the snake still writhing even in death, eyes glaring across battlefields for centuries to come. Zeus claims credit for his son's triumphs. Hermes, ever restless, flits in and out, grinning at how neatly the tale has played out. And Hades, silent, satisfied that his helm of invisibility has returned to the shadows. Here's your grounding fact. Perseus' descendants were said to rule Mycenae, Argos, and even beyond. From his bloodline comes Heracles, the most famous hero of all. and through him the myths thread into every corner of Greek identity. The story of Perseus isn't isolated, it's a foundation stone in the temple of myth. A quirky tidbit? Some storytellers claimed that when Perseus finally died, Athena placed him and Andromeda among the stars, right next to the monster Cetus, so that the drama of their lives would play out forever in the constellations. It means that even on sleepless nights today, you could look up and still find him chasing away sea beasts above your head. Historians still argue over details. Was Perseus truly the founder of Mycenae? Did Andromeda really mother half of Greece's rulers? Was Medusa always a villain, or did later storytellers twist her into one? But perhaps that's the point. The arguments, the shifting versions, the contradictions, they're proof that these stories weren't written to sit silent. They were meant to be told, retold, reshaped, until even you, drifting off to sleep, carry a piece of them in your own mind. And now the tale has wound its way to stillness. The chest in the sea, the boast in the hall, the mirrored strike in the cave, all have faded into whispers. Perseus stands at the edge of memory, not boasting, not fighting, but simply existing as part of the great hum of history. You can almost hear the waves again, rocking gently, lulling you toward rest. And now, as the last notes of Perseus' story fade, let your mind ease into quieter currents. The storms and monsters have passed, the halls of stone are empty, and only the steady rhythm of waves remains. Imagine yourself floating again in that wooden chest, not as a prisoner, but as a dreamer. Rock gently by the sea. The sky above is vast, stars scattered like spilled sand, each one carrying a fragment of the myths you've just wandered through. Your breath slows. Each inhale cool and soft, each exhale a gentle release. The clamor of gods and heroes drifts further away, their voices muffled by distance, until they are nothing more than echoes in the deep. The images of stone statues and serpent hair dissolve into mist, leaving behind only the feeling of common inevitability, like waves meeting the shore, like night sliding gently into dawn.